And back now to our continuing coverage of an arrest in the case of the Golden State Killer. Investigators credited DNA with being the deciding piece of evidence to crack this case. And joining us now to talk more about how this may have happened and the challenges in such investigations is DNA legal consultant Becca Barlow. Becca, thank you so much for joining us.
No problem.
So as we heard, the Sacramento District Attorney said that after 40 years, the DNA helped solve this case in the last 6 days after police actually collected evidence from the suspect before he was arrested. In your experience, what does this sound like actually happened? This is very fascinating for people at home.
Well, I don't want to speculate,
Right.
and I know just as much as everybody else does, but it sounds to me as if the gentleman who was arrested was not in the state database and that the laboratory somehow knew who he was, or the police, and went to pick up something he left behind and use that as a DNA sample. That's just speculation.
Right. Okay, but that does make some sense. So 40 years, though, I mean, that seems like a long time. Is this on the longer end for making sort of a DNA match?
It is, but it's not unheard of. This is not unusual, actually.
Okay. How, we've had the DNA database, it's starting to shrink a little bit. We've heard reports about that. Can you talk a little bit about how it's harder to solve cold cases because not as much DNA is being collected from criminals, but you aren't necessarily for an expanded database?
Well, I don't actually think it's correct that the database is shrinking.
Okay.
The speed at which it's growing has slowed.
Okay.
But it's always expanding, and it's getting close to 3 million people now.
Wow.
And having a database can be useful for certain types of crimes, but it presumes that the person who committed the crime is actually in the database.
Right.
And that's not always true.
Okay.
So.
And we don't know specifically exactly how long before his arrest they collected his DNA, but it sounds like it may have been fairly recently. We're always hearing about all these backlogs. I mean, how could it have even happened so quickly that they made that match?
Well, once you have the profile of the individual from the evidence from a crime, it sits there in static, right? It is there. And so all you need is the person to compare it to at that point. So making the comparison, depending on the type of technology they were using, is relatively straightforward. Not always, but usually it's quite simple. So I don't know when they started testing. They could have started testing a couple of years ago or even 10 years ago, and they just simply couldn't identify a person to match it to.
Okay. All right, that makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, Becca Barlow, thank you so much for coming in and giving us a little bit of insight into how this whole DNA world works when it comes to solving crimes.
No
Thank
problem.
you.
Thank you.